Welcome to episode 118 of the XrmToolCast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with Rick Wilson, former MVP and now a Microsoft employee, about his PCF Calendar Control. It works both the model-driven apps and the Canvas apps. So if you're in need of a calendar control that's more customizable than one that's out of the box, then this is definitely the show for you. So sit back, relax, enjoy the new year. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the XrmToolCast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and Scott, he loves the New Year drill. Scott, how's it going?
Yes, thank you, Daryl. Happy New Year to you. Yes, first XrmToolCast in 2025. Can you believe it? 2025. It's come around quite quickly, I think. But yeah, it's about the time we kind of make lots of, New Year's resolutions and stuff. So have you been doing any? I've seen all these posts on LinkedIn, and it always makes me feel sort of unprepared and inadequate for the new year. Everyone's got their plans out and all these reviews of the last year, and I'm thinking, I should be doing that, but then I never do. So what about you, Daryl? Have you got some, New Year's resolutions that you're going to keep?
I just decided that there's no reason for me to try because I lack the effort or desire to create such resolutions.
You've given up completely now.
So about the only thing I've done is I've gained like 3 pounds in the last 3 months, and that trend is like keep on going up. So I better do something. So I've gone through and said, all right, well, if my weight is higher than it has been for the last 3 months, then no desserts until that goes down. So that's kind of the little check balance.
Not your just desserts. You can have no desserts.
No desserts. No desserts. Yes, try to stay within a healthier range. So yeah. Anyway, that's me.
No, that's a good, very good resolution. Do you have a history of keeping them? Because that's the thing that they say, to people, when you set a goal, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. So.
Normally, my New Year's resolution is to not have any New Year's resolutions.
Yeah,
I'm trying to keep that faithfully. I haven't quite sure if I have or not, but so I don't usually come up with New Year's resolutions. So no, I don't really have one this year. I don't. I guess I plan to fail because I don't plan.
Well, I guess my New Year's resolution is to take, not to kind of punish myself for not having kind of a nicely laid out LinkedIn post about the last year in review and looking forward to the next year. That's my New Year's resolution, is to not beat myself up about that.
Yes. All right. So I'll just check in. Scott, have you beat yourself up lately? No? Okay, good. Keep that up. Stop.
Thank you. Yeah. If you could just keep me honest on this, be an accountability buddy, that would be great.
I probably have to refer to my calendar to make sure I can schedule
I see where you're going with this. It's just, calendar, new year, we need to check our calendar, and Power Platform, we need a good place to put that, and what better place to put it is a PCF control, really.
Yes, totally. So that brings us to our guest today. Our guest today is Rick Wilson, a principal consultant at Microsoft, a Power Platform expert. Hails from Westerville, Ohio. So he's probably 3 hour drive ish. So
about 3.
Pretty close to me. Yeah, pretty close to me here in Indy. So another Midwesterner. So it's like we're brothers already. But we've never really said anything. We never officially met or never even non-officially met. So this is our first time. But Rick does have a PCF calendar control that I thought looked interesting. I thought we could talk about on the show and share with our listeners. So Rick, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me on. This calendar control is not anything new. I actually came out with it in 2021. But for some reason, I just managed to get some traction here recently. So,
was it a New Year's resolution of you, Rick? Did you kind of say, 2025 is going to be the year of the calendar control?
Well, it was also kind of I put all these PCF controls together a while back, like when PCF was still in kind of preview mode and everything like that before it went GA, and it was a little bit of a New Year's resolution to actually do some work on them again, because my issues list on GitHub was getting pretty long.
Did you get to the point where you muted notifications from GitHub because that there's a point in the open source life cycle that happens where you just like you kind of put your head in the sand and I can't deal with this now. I'm going to delay it to a later date.
Well, you don't have to tell me that. I have a pull request that I've had out in one of your libraries for I think 2 years now. So
I knew you were going to bring that up. I literally knew you were going to bring that up.
This is reverse homework. We don't actually get this on the. Okay, we are 4 minutes and 40 seconds in, and he's already giving Scott homework. Rick, you may be my favorite person of the year.
It's a preemptive strike that Rick's done, just because he knows that we're going to give him homework, and so it's just got to get in there straight away.
So we were talking earlier about some nerd stuff, and Rick has a picture behind him that it kind of speaks to me. I'm like, maybe I should get myself one of those. But it's a TIE fighter shooting down World War II plane on the Spitfire. What is that?
I think
Lightning. P-35.
I'm trying to remember now, but it's a U.S. aircraft.
Okay.
But
right.
yeah, and then you got to look a little bit higher up there to kind of in the background to see there's the Death Star up there as well.
Okay.
So.
All right. So when it comes to being the owner and maintainer of the Calendar Control PCF thing that you have here, are you in the TIE fighter shooting the issues, or are you in the World War II airplane getting handled? Which one?
I'm in the airplane. Yeah, getting hammered. Right. Like, yeah. But honestly, I mean, like I had. When I got started with it, I had Art Karp, who works for Aventix. I actually had like someone helping me out. So like it wasn't just me doing I did the development, but Art was like, there is my user acceptance testing. He was actually doing a project with the control, which was great because it was like that real world, scenario of like what it needs to do. So I think a lot of things in the controller really already got done early on, but I needed to kind of update things. NPM libraries get old, security's got to be updated, things like that. So that was also part of like coming back and redoing this, was to kind of make sure the security stuff was good, and started thinking about some of the features. Like React Big Calendar is what I use as the base for the calendar control with this, and they had done a lot of updates. So it'd been, I think I was at least like two major versions behind or something like that. So they've definitely added some stuff there, but
so now it handles the Y2K bug.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, isn't that though? That's the hidden cost of PCF, isn't it? It's like, with any code that you're going to do is you're going to use libraries these days. We can't build anything from scratch, right? And unless you're building something kind of purely on like .NET Framework, where you've got like long-term support that's going off into the distance, and even then you're going to get to the point where you're going to have to upgrade. And like you say, Rick, security vulnerabilities. You get these dependabot notifications about these obscure vulnerabilities that are marked as severe, and you look at them and you think, well, no, there's no way that I'd be affected by that. But however, you are still getting labeled as having a severe security vulnerability. And so, we in low code, you're spoiled because Microsoft has to deal with all that stuff. And even in using CRM over the years, again, we've never had to deal with all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's almost like as soon as you have a PCF control or any kind of pro code in this way, it's like you're going to have to pay a tax forevermore to deal with this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I will say though, like I feel like in some ways though, it helps with the technical debt, right? Like I'm not the one having to do React Big Calendar, and deal with all that. Like that's what I like about the PCF controls really is like, when I started building out, like I have a whole library of them on my GitHub that I did. I have like I think 12 or 15 of them out there, and there's a lot of great examples on there of just different patterns and practices that I kind of had to find while going through things. Like the calendar specifically. Typically it can be used on a subgrid. But when you do a subgrid for a PCF control, it only usually pulls back like how many records you asked it to pull back, like the first 4 or the first 10, right? So then you have to do paging. So it's like, how do you go ahead and do that stuff? So like a lot of these, with a calendar control, you kind of want to show everything you want to make sure you got everything, for calendar sometimes, or at least within a certain time span you have. So like I think there's a lot of good things for people who are looking to build PCF controls. I think the calendar control is a good thing for that too, to kind of show you how to do paging. Some of the issues I found with like just making sure to get, getting more than 5,000 records, those kind of standard things that we always have to do with plugins and other things too, right? But like kind of how to do that in PCF, you know.
Yeah, and those kind of challenges, everyone will come up against, and so that's what's so nice about having open source and resources like yourself, like where you've already done it. So yeah, I would encourage anyone to, if you're going to write any kind of PCF controls, to go and check out Rick's GitHub repo, because like you say, you've got tons and tons. It's like a treasure trove of stuff in there. And actually creating a control that works, because your control works in model-driven apps. Like you say, it works in subgrids, on forms. It works in Canvas as well, and in custom pages. And so that's no small feat to actually make a control that works across both. Because even though it's the same framework, right, that it's actually quite a different technique. So, I mean, what's your testing kind of regime like in terms of making sure you got kind of coverage across both those platforms?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, unfortunately, like most of it was manual testing at the time. I built all this during COVID. So, and COVID was a great time to like learn new things. Like you weren't going anywhere, right? And I didn't really know React. I didn't really know TypeScript. And so like it was like a whole new thing for me, right? Kind of getting into this. But testing wise, like it really was a lot of manual stuff. It was trying things out. I mean, I had Art helping me out on the Canvas side, really. So I kind of got to focus more on the model app side. But again, like you said, Scott, like thinking about the Canvas app, there's so much more design you have to think about than with model. So it's like, okay, what other properties do I need to expose to make sure that it can look good in a Canvas app? I think there's also things with just with Canvas apps, just getting the proper getting a collection set up correctly, right? In model apps, you get the data already from views and subgrids and stuff like that. But in Canvas, you really do have to think about the collection you're putting together. I did want to build this for both though, because like that was the one thing, like, Microsoft has the control already out for model apps, right? But there wasn't much going on with it. I mean, you could do a few things. It was kind of clunky. It wasn't being updated all that often. So I wanted to really make something that would allow for customization. Like maybe you just want to include a single view for a day. You don't want to have the week and the year and all those other buttons in there, like things that kind of distract users and get in the way sometimes. So that was kind of when I really focused on with this one. And yeah, I feel like with testing though in the future, now that I'm kind of looking at these again, now with AI, 2021, there wasn't really all that stuff there. I feel like AI is going to kind of help me fill that gap in doing these kind of like one-off, like personal projects that I like to do, using AI to kind of help me build those test cases and do it more programmatically. So, it doesn't feel as overwhelming, right? Like as a single developer, you're just like, well, I got it working, right? It works great. I've had some good user testing, but like, oh, now I got to do code comments and now I got to do test scripts and like all this stuff. But like, I think that's where like AI is going to help me like push past all that, like, get me into the inertia of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's also nothing like having a user base to test stuff out as well. I mean, what they call it, the scream test. You just push it out and see if someone screams, and then you've got a problem, then you have to fix it. So it's, do you have a lot of feedback from people using, because you've done this update, right? And so have you managed that kind of cycle where you pushed out a new version and got feedback from people?
A little bit. I mean, it's still usually it's like, okay, now I want this additional feature,
Yeah,
so
right, okay, of course.
like drag and drop is something that somebody's been asking for, which I'm definitely going to implement. That'll probably be the next thing I implement is a drag and drop. Kind of give it to more of that. And I know you've done a lot, Scott, with the drag and drop stuff. Like I've used your PCF control and stuff. But I think that's important because that gives it that Outlook feel,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it really reduces the number of clicks and makes that user acceptance much better because people can do things faster. I mean, the first calendar control I built was actually I used a control from a company called Bryntum, Bryntum. Great calendar control. You got to pay for it though, right? So my customer is willing to, I was doing a consulting project at the time, and they were like, hey, we really need a resource calendar to be able to kind of drag and drop and let managers fill out people's time and stuff like that. So that was like the first PCF calendar control I built. And that kind of inspired me to do this, right? It was like, wow, look at the cool thing I built, but now I want to do it in a way that's like, a free kind of version, and something I could reuse in other projects later on, for other consulting projects. And sometimes there's clients sometimes willing to pay for an extra control, and sometimes they're not, right? So you got to use what you can get.
And it's interesting, you're talking about like, drag and drop and, those kind of, editing features, because PCF is great for that. If you're going to make one control across all services, Canvas model and all that, and custom pages, it's great for visualizing. As soon as you get into the editing, that suddenly creates a very different kind of surface area you have to deal with, because editing something in model-driven apps is going to be a very different experience to editing it inside a canvas. So have you kind of thought about how you would manage that kind of editing, dragging, dropping, raising events and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, for like the model app stuff, it's definitely going to be using the web API in the background, just allow you to kind of move things around. What I've done for the Canvas apps though, like what I think I'll probably stay the same way is, like right now when you click on the calendar, it basically raises an event in the Canvas app that you then can kind of decide what you want to do with, right? Like what was the time range that you started your click on? What was the time range you ended? So you get those as output variables in the PCF control. And then in the Canvas experience, you kind of make that decision, right? You kind of build your own interface and do that. If you want to just have it automatically update the record and not have to think about it. But I think I'll probably still have the user kind of do that stuff in the background, or kind of build their own thing in Canvas. But in Model App, it'll just kind of use the web API in the background to kind of update the record without having to actually open the record and do all those clicks and things like that. And I'm going to set it so you can choose whether or not you want drag and drop. So I'll make it another feature so you can turn it on or off based on what you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's when the differences start to creep in, and you suddenly got a completely separate code base for Canvas and for model, because there is that API that on a data set where you can edit, the editable grid, right? Editable grid uses that API, and that API does work in Canvas as well. But like you say, in Canvas, the ethos is very different. It's you're expected to manage events and updates and patching and do the additional, the ability to have additional logic there, to choose your method of implementation. That's the ethos in Canvas. Whereas model, the expectation is that model does all that. It's opinionated. It manages the updates for you, and you then do everything through customizations on top of what it already does. So, and I think that's where we come up against that kind of paradigm, the differences in terms of how you approach building your app. It's like metadata driven or screen layout, driven first tough stuff. And that's why PCF development is so different across the two, because it's the ethos is very different itself. So yeah, it sounds like you've got a good plan there. I look forward to seeing that. I mean, so when that's going to be in January 2025?
probably more like February. Yeah, but I'm working on it a little bit. I actually took this last. Yeah.
Next year.
It's actually like spinning up with you guys is like the first time I've actually even turned on my work laptop for the holidays. Wow. So it was actually nice to like finally get away, spend some time with the kids, and just like step back a little bit. But
we feel privileged. Thank you for taking the time for us. Really appreciate it.
But yeah, like you were talking about with the ethos is so different. I mean, like I started off on, Dynamics for customer service and marketing, like the old school on-prem, all that stuff, and where it was all just model apps, so but like I still find, and even now though, even with all Power Platform and Canvas apps and all this, I still, no matter what, I tend to find myself always building a model app first. Like whether or not I'm going to build a Canvas app on top, I always think of like model apps as like the whole idea of like that's your back office app for business operations, right? The people who are doing the real work, like sometimes not the data entry, but the real work on those business processes, right? Like using the model app for that. And I built a lot of PCF controls for model apps as well that are very tailored to model apps, and not just Canvas, because I don't know. I find that, like, as you said, like with Canvas, you're kind of expected to do all that. And as soon as I start thinking about the technical debt, I started like, I'm just going to do a model app. You know,
yeah, totally.
And some people I think would say, like, when you use a model app over a Canvas, right, you don't have as much flexibility. But a good friend of mine, Dave Milton, who works in Microsoft too, he's I love this analogy that he's used before with like the idea of low code and Power Platform, and when you have these like chunks of things you can build with, right? You're limited in what you can do sometimes, really. But are you that limited? Like, he kind of equates it to musical notes, right? There's a certain set of musical notes. That's what you get. But you got Beethoven, Tchaikovsky. I mean, like, yeah, you name it, like old composer, but all the new stuff too. I mean, like, musicians have been building music with these same set of rules and kind of framework forever, and they still create amazing new things. So I think the same thing could be said with like model apps. Like, yes, like you have some structure and things in there, but you can still build beautiful and amazing things that are above and beyond what you think you can do, right?
Yeah.
So
that's interesting, the music analogy. Yeah. Kind of go off and doing some sort of crazy, avant-garde composition in Canvas app, and then you go, oh no, actually I'll go back to the traditional,
let's maybe call PCF controls the extra instruments you can add to your musical ensemble, right? Like you want to add a trumpet in there or something like that, go ahead and put it in.
Build your own instrument. I mean, let's try and
yeah.
But I think the primary driving force in my decision making usually is what kind of data sources are you going to connect to? Because if you're connecting to some sort of external stuff with connectors, then Canvas is great for that. And I think that's what's so good about PCFs that work in Canvas, is that you can you don't need to start necessarily with Dataverse, and I think that's why PCFs are not always that metadata driven, because that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Is that a lot of the metadata that you get from model driven apps is not going to be available to you in Canvas. I mean, obviously some of it's there, but not quite the same kind of rich level of information you get from a data source that comes directly in Dataverse.
And you got to think about different things too. Like in model apps, one example is the culture or language for the calendar. The way I did that for model apps is it just pulls it off your user settings, right? So it already knows, or like what your culture is, so you can adjust the calendar automatically, things like that. I've added a lot of translations, like that was translation labels were real big, right? Because I just added a couple more with the latest release. So I think it supports like 15 or 20 languages, which
awesome.
I will tell you, many of those were ChatGPT. So, like if they are wrong, file an issue and I will fix them, because there's those nuances, right? That every language has. And I had a friend, the French translations, I had a friend who studies French, like has her PhD and everything like that, in actually the French language. And like she helped me get a few. She's like, it's close, but it doesn't quite work for some things. But and in model, I can kind of see where you're at with that, right? But in Canvas, you can use like the language function in Power FX to kind of grab, what the current language is, or if you want to just make the calendar always support the same language, you can just kind of put that in the settings as well. I got a setting for that in Canvas. So yeah, you have to think about those things like languages. There's those things that are built in a model that you got to supply yourself in Canvas or have a way to do it. So
yeah, wow, languages. Yeah, it's I remember with the RIM Workbench, I started trying to support, like 5 or 6 different languages. And I just had to give up in the end because it was just, having to, because I'm not natively speaking those languages. And like you say, there's the nuances of the language means that you can use a translating service, but it's never going to get it right. I mean, even in Dynamics CRM, you can hear about people saying, oh, that's that's just not, that doesn't mean anything in my language,
Yep.
I've got one open pull request for the early bound generator, and it's one of the language translation character files. I need to pull that in. I think is it Polish? I think I can't remember which it is now, but yeah.
I think Polish is one of the ones I recently. And then with calendars too, you have right to left. I mean, with languages, right, you got to think about that. Like, I had somebody contact me, and they're like, "Oh, I'm trying to do the Hebrew language," and it's completely flipped, right? So you got to think about those things. So I had to start adding that to the calendar as well to make sure we do that. And there's a lot of options too. I mean, like different calendars start on different days in different countries, right? So being able to set the start date for a calendar, things like that. I got those options in there. You can limit it. I got like a work week view, so you can just look at Monday through Friday or whatever your work week is. You can actually adjust it to say I only want like Monday and Tuesday, right? Maybe you got a store that's only open a couple days a week or something like that.
Well, I only use the ancient Mayan calendar, so I make sure it supports that.
Well, you stopped using that like 10 years ago, right? Because
it was a common misconception that actually, although it looks like it's the end of time, it just starts again. So the calendar just loops. That's the way it works. So yeah, people who don't use the Mayan calendar don't know this, but I'll do a pull request. But it's very brave, kind of using date times, because I do think that date times are probably the hardest thing to deal with in software, second to security. Because security is the hardest thing, and then date times because of time zones and. Did you come up against those kind of challenges with localization? If I'm setting a date time in the UI and then making sure it's like, it's converted to UTC if you can use the web API and all that kind of stuff.
All the time. Yeah. Like that was a huge part of it. And like, I am blessed right now. My current customer, my current project they care more about dates than times. So I use the date only, option. If I can use date only, it is date only. Like I totally agree with you. Like anytime I got to do date and time, I'm like, oh, it's going to be so much. In fact, I think I've turned down consulting gigs where they're like, well, this is going to be an international based project and we're going to have users in multiple time zones all over the world. And I'm like, like, one of the nice things about working for the federal government, like kind of in the public sector space, is I'm usually at least just mostly U.S. and mostly East Coast, right? So I will say that is something I definitely appreciate and, makes my life a lot easier.
It's in your contractual terms. And saying, right. I don't deal with international dates.
I do date only. That's it. I'm done.
Do you care about times? Yep. No. I only do dates.
But even that gets hard because, right, it's still stored in as a date time in the background, right? It just did 000 for the time. So sometimes even though you do date only, you still run into scenarios sometimes where it goes the day before that, like it doesn't go to the right day you're looking for, things like that. It does get frustrating at times.
And then you got like the situations where the user's date time in the browser settings is different to the ones that actually in the Dataverse user. And then it's funny because like in the UK, there was always like a bug that it was every kind of, you get every junior developer in the UK would always come up. The first problem they'd always usually find is that at one point during the year, where daylight savings times kicks in, they have that horrible realization that all the software that they built for the previous 6 months now doesn't work.
I used to think it was like worse being on like just past the date the day time.
The international, the
International,
daylight
yeah.
line.
It's like, so like, is like working in software around that line like the worst because you got some people that may be a day behind it. But now I'm wondering also if like working on Mediterranean on Meridian time, if that like if you're just like, oh, everything's Meridian time, and then all of a sudden like, oh, I forgot, like people have other time zones, and
that's exactly what happens to every British
that's I never thought of that being something of, oh yeah, not everybody happens to be GTC, so
exactly. That's
Here's a question for you, Daryl. Like being in Indiana, like do people think you're on Central or Eastern?
I don't really. I don't know. They don't really ask a whole lot because I mean, only a part of Indiana's on Central, and we used to switch. Yeah. We used to not do daylight savings time, so half the time we were on Central, half the time we weren't, and yeah, it gets really confusing. But no one. I mean, that hasn't changed in the last I think decade. No, even longer than that. So yeah, it's been like 16, 20 years around there. So I think most people know we're in Eastern. So
I ask because being Ohio is kind of like in that space of the United States where people are like, are you like, where are you at? You know what I mean? Are you still like Eastern? And we are Eastern time zone, all of Ohio. But I get that all the time. They're like, oh, you're on Central. I'm like, nope, no, I'm the same time as you, like almost all the time. Like people just think Ohio is like way over, much further than it really is. So yeah, that's why I
wish we were on Central. It could be a lot better. Yeah. It also gets confusing when I drive south in Tennessee and all of a sudden I'm on Central. I didn't go east or west, and now my time is different.
Well, and isn't there people keep on threatening to kind of remove daylight saving times and all this kind of stuff, and it's just can you imagine the software? It would be like another Y2K kind of thing if suddenly, I mean, obviously Windows and things, a lot of stuff would be fine because. But it would have to be all patched. And I bet you there's so many bugs that would be introduced by time zone changes like that. But it would make it so much easier, wouldn't it? If we were all just, everything just UTC. Get over it.
I don't know who the people are that handle the actual software of figuring out when does daylight savings time happen. And now I can't imagine the amount of testing that was required to do that, to figure out and get that all working and make sure it's good. Because my very first job out of college was working on continuing education credits for insurance agents. And somebody in the VB6 day decided that dates were horrible in VB6, and so everything was string dates. And leap years did not exist. So on that day, every 4 years, the program just died. Nothing worked that day. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, huh? What happens on leap day? And like, oh, it just doesn't work. I'm like,
it just doesn't work. Just go home.
Yeah. Oh, it was
my son's a leap day baby. So yeah, that would be something that would affect, that would have affected him, I'm sure,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably even worse than Bobby delete tables, right?
Yeah. I do always wonder, anytime I have to fill out a form or do something like that, I'm like, is the drop down going to be correct? Did somebody just kind of not code this correctly? And am I not going to find the 29th on there? So,
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Well, it's just we have to rely on other people's libraries these days. Kind of. At one point, I did look into the way in which it's all stored. There's a code, isn't there? Because the number of hours and the number of days that has to pass before it increments and all this kind of stuff. But now, I mean, just rely on other people's code. We just hope that other people's code's fine, and they don't have any security vulnerabilities that we have to patch.
I mean, one thing I love. I mean, I will say, I love the whole community aspect of Power Platform and everything is one of those things where I do love that we reuse a lot of people's code. Daryl, I mean, I use your Visual Studio Accelerator. That thing has been used in a lot of consulting projects. I mean,
I never knew.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, it was kind of that and Sparkle, or the more of the ALM stuff, the Spackle, as I like to call it, the SPAL, the SPA, you just that's one of the guys I used to work with, Will, called it that, and it just kind of took off. I'm like, it's what you spackle onto your project to kind of finish it all out and kind of get it pushed out. I always thought that was hilarious, but yeah, I mean, those kind of contributions, that's why I like doing these PCF controls too, because it's kind of the same thing, right? Just getting things out to people that they can hopefully reuse, and it is nice, like resharing the control and you guys kind of picking up on it. What I really loved was actually seeing a lot of the comments of like, oh, I've been using it for this or I've been using it for that. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
my God, like at
Yeah.
least some of the work I'm doing is being reused, you know?
Yeah, well, that's the
know.
rewarding part of it, isn't it? And that's what keeps us kind of, you know, helping other people, because it is rewarding seeing when people's, you know, if they've managed to deploy it and it's helped them and they've allowed them to do more than they would have done before without, you know, having to build these things from scratch. But I noticed, so because you mentioned it's using the React, you know, React library. I've noticed that it's not a virtual control. Are you thinking of now virtual controls are GA, although they've been GA theoretically for a long time, but now they're officially GA.
I thought about doing that, but I think I wanted to do I think it was there might have been something with the version of React that was available within Power Platform that I think I needed a newer version based on the updates that had come from React the Calendar. So I wasn't able to like get the exact version of React that I needed. I think that is unfortunately, you know, like it's something you got to think about, right, when you're writing these, like what version of React am I going to use? What's available in, especially when you think about model and canvas together, right? You know, like there's the just certain versions you can utilize with PCF. You know, that's one of the things that I mean, talking about like technical debt, you know, I mean, the product team's got to think about that, right? I mean, like for them, adding a new version of React changes a lot of things. So, I mean, I definitely get it from their standpoint of like, why are we maybe a little bit older? I still want to hear their, you know, I know I do a lot of custom do a lot of Power Automate stuff too, like custom connectors and stuff like that. And I am still waiting for OpenAPI 3.0, but those are some of those things. Like you know,
we all are waiting for.
Yeah, the OpenAPI 2.0 has been out for a very, very, very long time, and so is 3 at this point. So there are those times when I kind of think like, can we just pick up on these newer versions of things? Which is hard, again, building on some of these, you know, some of these platforms. Just, you know, you do have to build with what they got, you know.
No, exactly. And that this, like you say, the platform itself having to maintain a certain versions, and I think it's very brave to have that kind of idea of have virtual controls where the controls are actually, you know, going to be a lot more performant and the memory footprint is going to be lower. I guess with a calendar control, most of the time, the majority of your functionality is going to be, you know, kind of a calendar control. It's not like it's a, you know, like a button or a drop down, you know, where you're going to have lots and lots of instances. Most of the time, you're only going to ever have one instance of the calendar control. And I mean, that's really where virtual controls really come into their own is where you have many, many instances of a control. So I guess it's not so much of a challenge problem for that.
And the good news is we don't, you know, I can just do it as a traditional one, right? And just use whatever version of React I want, you know? Like, that is the nice thing about PCF is like, Heyman and the product group who like kind of built that, thought about a lot of those things. I like that they keep adding things on. But like, you know, like some of that was already there. And like the Canvas version of the PCF control, like one of the things I typically do in my, and I have it in the sample app. So there is a downloadable sample app that's also part of that GitHub. The Canvas app that's in there. You know, when I go out and get data, I really try to get it for whatever the date range of the calendar is. Which one of some of the other outputs on there is like, what is the start range? What is the current end range of what the calendar is showing? So you can just go out and just get the data you need, as opposed to getting huge amounts of data, which is a little bit slower in the model app because you have to kind of just grab all the data in the model app. You don't have that availability of just grabbing a certain date range. Like you might be able to make the view only show a certain date range, but how do you kind of map that to what the calendar control is showing? I mean, you could do a view that's like, show me the next 3 months, but then what if somebody keeps clicking the next button to go out past the 3 months, right? The view doesn't have any of that. So like you have to think about that. Whereas, so at Canvas, you get some of that additional availability of like, okay, I can make this collection when I raise the on change event. And I usually use like a toggle or something like that to kind of set my data source in Canvas. So I set a variable on the on change of the calendar to kind of like recheck to make the default of the toggle yes. And then in the yes of the toggle is where I usually do all my collection stuff. And
Mm,
I look at the start range, I look at the end range, I get all the data for that. And it just speeds things up really fast. So, but that's all in the sample app as well. So.
Yeah, that's great having that code that you can refer to. Because so in model-driven apps, do you just simply render what the view filters are giving you, and then you just what you do? Do you just kind of like just set the page size and then load up
Set the page
large
5
pages?
to 5,000, and
Yeah.
start rolling through it. So
Right, yeah. So do you download, keep going until you've got no more record?
Yeah.
Right.
until the view, well, it kind of depends. I mean, I think yes, I do that. Like, and the other thing that I would love to see, if the product group is listening, that I would like to see about PCF controls is just a way to kind of know whether or not you're easily know whether or not you're in a model app or canvas within a PCF control. Like, I found like workarounds and kind of hacks and stuff like that. Like, I look to see like sizes or something like that, and if it's set to -1, I basically know it's a model app or something like that, right? Like, I can kind of figure those things out, but it would really be nice to actually have something in like the mode properties of PCF to know whether or not it's canvas or model. To kind of easily make those decisions,
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that would be great. Like you say, there's some kind of these hacks that you can do, but and it's like knowing if you're in the test harness as well, kind of that would be nice to know that, because you can add filters to the data set programmatically. So I guess you could add a date range filter to get just the date that you're looking for, but then every time you then move your calendar, he's going to have to go and retrieve some more data, and so it swings around about. So I mean, it's a reality, isn't it? It's an unfortunate reality that you just have to deal with this fact that you don't have access to all the data on the client, especially so when you're doing. I always think like Outlook. Outlook is an amazing application. People complain about it's slow and stuff, but actually, if you think about what it's doing, if you think, because you just assume that it's going to show you everything. It's like instantaneous access to could be hundreds of thousands of records, on the server, and you just assume that you're going to have access to that all instantaneously on the client because it's a calendar or it's an email. But actually, if you think about what it's doing there, it's a lot. It's a lot of gymnastics in order to do that.
Rick probably knows it better than most, I'd guess, too.
Yes.
And some unfortunate soul had to think in that calendar app how to deal with all the dates and times. So somebody's out there just banging their head on a desk all day long, like trying to figure out those times.
Then there's the people that don't do it well, that you want to go bang their head on the desk for them. Like, every time I open up my Fitbit app and I look at my weight over, it gives you last week or last month, it resets the view every month for the month and every year for the year. So if I go for my weight for the last year, I've only got 3 days because we're in the third. It doesn't show me the last 365 days. It just shows me for the current calendar year. And so this is dumb. Why did we do this? Who signed off on this?
Well, I mean, the best thing about being a consultant, best and worst, is you come in sometimes to a project. Like, I came into one project, it had been going on for 5 years. They hadn't delivered, right? And it was basically okay, guys, and I had myself and 2 other people, and we came in, our company had bought the other company who never finished it. And essentially it was there must have been 20 developers who had touched this code, and there was 20 different solutions all over the place. They had all done dates and times differently. And within 9 months, we were able to kind of feel okay, what do they do? We ended up rewriting everything, but it was all in one solution using your plugin base, and Daryl. So and sometimes just talking to other people, and knowing how other people are doing it, going back to kind of the community thing of we should all be sharing how we're doing this so people can do it correctly. I think that's really important, because when there's 20 different ways to do it, everybody finds their own way, and then sometimes you gotta try to pull it all together, and then it's a real struggle at that point. So sometimes you're better off just starting from scratch. But those are also the projects too. Like we got done with that thing in 9 months. I had somebody, it's been running for 5 years now. And somebody was like, oh yeah, like that thing's still running. We have very few problems with it. Like, we get the occasional like thing, but it's usually like a new feature we want to add and stuff like that. So I'm like always happy to hear when those things are running well, always makes me happy on the consultant, a little consultant heart. So
a little bit of you is still running out there somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, it's always very satisfying, isn't it, when you hear about those things that you've walked away and they're actually still going, they're still using it. So, yeah.
I feel like Scott and I have kind of done a disservice. I'm not sure. Have we even gone through like all the features of why someone would be using the calendar control? Like, can we get a brief like overview of what it offers for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, the calendar control itself. I mean, like you have. It can do resource management as well as just a traditional calendar control. So you have like a month view, a day view, week view, agenda view, and work week view. So those are kind of all the different views you can have. You can choose which one of those views you want to show as buttons in there. And if you go to React Big Calendar as well, that's another place you can kind of look to get some ideas of things you can do. But I think I have somewhere like 20 different properties in it now of things you can adjust. So the background colors, the event colors, you can have like a default event color for all events. And then you can set event colors per event. So you basically just have to have a hex code for the color somewhere on the record that you're pulling from or collection in Canvas apps. So, I mean, you can change all the coloring. The calendar itself has like a background color. The header colors can all be changed. That's where a lot of this stuff from the Canvas app was really nice, right? Having to work in there is like making it match to what you have in your Canvas app. You can do all those things. And the resource calendar is nice as well because it's, you can see, hey, what is Tom? What is Sarah? What are these people doing over these different days? I tried to also make it so you could pull in data from, so like if you have your entity and you have lookups, to other data, right? So you got those relationships there. You can do like the entity name dot and then kind of put the attribute name or column name in there as well. So you can kind of do like sub data of the record as well, right? You're not stuck to just what's on the face value of the record itself. But I mean, like I see this calendar being used all over the place. For where I've used it is like scheduling, event management. One place I'm actually going to use it here real soon is we have like 5 or 6 different calendars out there with SharePoint, with Outlook, whatever, right? So up here soon, I'm going to be using like data flows and Power Automate to kind of consolidate a lot of that data within Dataverse table and exposing it using this, right? So just having that one calendar that kind of brings everything together, or the nice thing you were mentioning earlier, Scott, too, with Canvas, you can kind of just have all those data sources right there, right? So I could just do direct connections from Canvas and bring all that into one calendar, shared calendar, if you will, right? But resource scheduling, things like that. Again, I mentioned like my friend Art was using it for ticketing management, right? So picking your events and kind of going through the process of purchasing tickets and things. So there's a ton of use cases for calendars, so it's lots of different things. I mean, the Canvas version, you can really customize everything, which is nice.
Yeah.
So
that's way more customizable than the out-of-the-box calendar control and model-driven apps. Because I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like you kind of use that and you quickly come up against the things like, oh, well, I want to change this. I mean, just the colors alone is quite a big deal.
One thing, and one thing to not, so people don't get confused about it. It's not like a pop-up calendar selector. We have those. Like it really is like a full calendar control. So you could actually use it as a selector if you wanted to in Canvas app, right? You definitely could, but because I do like when you click on a space on the calendar. It outputs where you clicked on, so you know the dates and times. So you actually could use it as a pop-up if you wanted to. But that's like kind of the big things when I'm searching for PCF controls for calendars. You find a lot of the, like, is it a date picker or is it a calendar, right? So this is, I would consider this more of a calendar than a date picker. So
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, the interesting thing when it comes to all the fun skis with calendars is trying to figure out when you get paid. I think that's the most interesting.
Paydays, put your paydays in there. I wish I was getting paid for this. You know, unfortunately, I released this as MIT stuff. I was actually trying to get my I was trying to become an MVP at the time. I figured COVID was another good time for that, right? So this was like, I was looking at these as my contributions to, you know, kind of becoming an MVP, which I did get. And then I was there for like 8 months until I joined Microsoft. And,
yeah, I saw that. I was like, yeah, it was very short-lived.
I accomplished my goal, and then, you know, just like, I'm good. I'm good. So.
Wow. Okay. Didn't realize that. The big thing about the calendar control is all the features and all the different options you have for it. Have you gotten to the point where you've automated the ability to add new features to it for yourself? Like, so for me in the early bound generator, there's like so many features. I can't cut to adding features and features, and I got to add it here. There's like 4 spots I need to add it to. I'm like, I'm wasting an hour every time I want to add a single like checkbox to do this. And so in the actual GitHub for it, there is a when form that you could run that say, I want to add this feature. It's like a string, it's a Boolean or whatever, and boom, just edit the code for me. And it goes through and like edits all the code for me. So, you know, it probably took me 10 hours to make. So I think I made my time back eventually. But yeah, have you gotten to that point yet?
I've gotten to the point. I did a bunch of refactoring on it recently to make it easier for me to find certain code, you know what I mean, instead of digging through one giant file. But one of the things I'm looking at right now, is Aider, AIDER, which is an AI tool. One of the biggest things I find with the AI tools is like the context, right? So if you have a project with one file in it, that's great. You can, you know, upload that file and be there. But what if you have, like, now that I've kind of done more, you know, splitting it out into multiple files, I need AI that can kind of think through, look at all those files, right, and kind of keep track of where all those files are. So I'm kind of experimenting right now with Aider, which is kind of a command line AI tool that, you know, I'm using Azure OpenAI and everything to kind of use my OpenAI models there. But what's nice about it is it does take into account my entire project rather than just one file. So I'm trying to see it right now how I can use that to speed up my development, because then I can be like, hey, I want to break out this code block in the same way, like with the drag and drop. I definitely need to kind of redo some of the same code. So I want to split those out into different components. So now I'm trying to figure out how to use Aider to be like, hey, here's my drag and drop version of the resource calendar. Here's my drag and drop version of the regular calendar. I want those split out into the same type of files that you see here. Help me do that, you know? So kind of same thing with test stuff. Using that even just for doing the code, and then, you know.
Have you tried using GitHub Editor mode? Because I've just been using that recently on a kind of a side project, and it's quite remarkable because, I mean, before you could do at workspace, and so you could mention the workspace and then kind of, you know, do stuff. But now what it does is that when you go into editor mode, you have a conversation about your entire project, and it automatically will pull in multiple files, and it will actually apply edits to multiple files. And it's, so I did a zero to hero for Victor Dantes just at the end of last year, showing how you can use this new mode of GitHub Copilot in Power Platform projects. So if you've got it in a plugin and you've got TypeScript stuff, you can use the editor mode to ask it to add features, and it will add both the plugin C# and the TypeScript for the client side, calling like a custom API or something, just by asking it, like in a single session, and it will show you all the edits, and you can accept or reject them or look at them. And it's really quite mind blowing how good and accurate it does it. And what it also does is, what I think is really great, is it you can have kind of conversations about your code and from like security vulnerabilities and things like that. And it will show you all the different places. So that's kind of like the old way of doing things, where you've got like a single file open, and then you ask it, you write some code in it, or you ask it to do something on that single file. It's like light years beyond that now. It's really quite remarkable. So definitely worth checking out.
I was going to say that's part of my homework then.
Is that a website, or is that an add-in for something, or is it on GitHub?
It's built into VS Code.
Into VS Code, okay. GitHub Editor, okay, all right.
Yeah, it's a kind of a whole. There's the normal chat mode, and then there's the editor mode. You kind of go into a separate kind of workspace, and like I said, it will. You can add contextual files if you want to, but it has access to your entire workspace. And if it's linked, it's a GitHub repo, it's much faster as well, because it uses the index on GitHub rather than just the local files.
Awesome. Yeah, I usually just use the chat, so I haven't tried that one yet. So definitely be looking at it this weekend. So
now our AI will finally fix all of our date time errors that we have.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll be able to accept an actual job.
Or the AI will give up. The AI will just give up.
Yeah.
It'll be like, you finally given me a task I can't do anymore.
Yes.
I can do it, but it's going to take all the energy the world has.
Yeah, exactly. Why is this a problem? It kind of doesn't understand the problem. Why are you worrying about date times? Just do everything in UTC, it'll be fine. That's AI's attitude.
Yes. All right, Ulrich, is there anything else we need to make sure we talk about before we say our goodbyes?
No, check out my GitHub repo. My handle on GitHub is rwilson504. I blog a ton, powerappsraw.com. And actually you can get to my GitHub through github.powerappsraw.com as well. If that's just easier. Same thing with put LinkedIn in front of that or whatever you want. It'll kind of get you to all my other social media stuff. So, but yeah, definitely love for people to take a look at the PCF Control, the calendar as well as some of the other ones. Definitely up for any issues people want to put in, for bugs or for new features. And I appreciate you guys having me on today. This is great.
Yeah, it's great meeting you. Great being able to have some nerd chats. That's always good. I appreciate those times.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, that's how our listeners can get hold of our guests. How can our listeners get hold of us?
You can get hold of us, cast@xrmtoolbox.com, or on socials, XrmToolCast. And we'd love to hear from you about any New Year's resolutions you might have that you may be keeping or you may not be keeping, and any suggestions for future guests. But it's been a really great pleasure to have you on, Rick. I really encourage everyone to go and check out all the work that Rick does. And I always get hungry whenever I go to your blog because I have the big picture of
big
meat
steak on there.
So that, maybe there's maybe a vegan version of your blog as well. Maybe you need to kind of have like dark mode, light mode, like vegan.
Vegan, I like that. I like that actually.
But it certainly makes me hungry. So, and it's great resource for PCF stuff as well in your GitHub repo. So highly encourage listeners, please, to go and check that out. But it's been great having you on.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Well, enjoy the snow, Rick.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
This has been the XrmToolCast with Daryl and Scott Darrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XrmToolCast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XrmToolCast page.